Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. Chapter 10. The Last Night. Mr. Utterson was sitting alone one evening after dinner when Poole arrived at his house. The lawyer was surprised to see him. "Hello, Poole," he said. "What is this visit about?" And then, when he looked again at Dr. Jekyll's servant, he continued, "What's the matter? Is the doctor ill?" "Mr. Utterson," Poole said, "something is terribly wrong." "Sit down and tell me about it," said the lawyer. "Thank you, sir," said Poole. "Where is the doctor?" asked Utterson. "Well, sir, that's the trouble," said Poole. "You know that he shuts himself in the room above the workroom. But something's wrong, terribly wrong. I'm afraid, Mr. Utterson. I've been afraid for a week now. I had to come and see you tonight." Utterson said, "What do you mean? What are you afraid of, Poole?" "I can't say, sir," said Poole. "But will you come with me, please, sir? Please, and see with your own eyes." Mr. Utterson's only answer was to get his hat and coat. Then the two men left the house. It was a wild, cold night in March, and there were no people in the streets. The two men walked quickly and in silence. When they reached Dr. Jekyll's front door, Poole knocked in a special way, and a voice from inside asked, "Is that you, Mr. Poole?" "It's all right," answered Poole. "You can open the door. It's me, Poole." The door opened, and all Dr. Jekyll's servants were waiting inside. When they saw Mr. Utterson, one cried, "Thank God! It's Mr. Utterson!" "Why are you all here?" Utterson wanted to know. "They are all afraid," said Poole. "Will you come with me, sir?" "Come as quietly as you can, Mr. Utterson. I want you to hear, but I don't want him to hear you." And he walked out to the courtyard at the back of the house. Utterson followed him. "One other thing, sir," Poole said. "If he asks you to go in, don't go, sir, please." They went through the workroom to the bottom of the stairs. Here Poole spoke quietly to Mr. Utterson. "Stand on one side and listen," he said. Then he went up the stairs and knocked on the door of the room above. "Mr. Utterson is asking to see you, sir," Poole called. An angry voice came from the other side of the door. "I can't see anyone." "Thank you, sir," said Poole. He took Mr. Utterson back to the house. "Sir," he said, looking into the lawyer's eyes, "was that the doctor's voice?" "It seems to be greatly changed," Utterson replied. "Changed?" said Poole. "I have been here in Dr. Jekyll's house for 20 years, and I know his voice. That isn't it. No, sir. The doctor is dead. He was killed a week ago when we heard him cry to God. But who is in there now, Mr. Utterson? And why does he stay there? That's what I want to know." "This is a strange story, Poole," said Utterson. "But if Dr. Jekyll was murdered, why does the murderer stay there? There is no good reason for that." "No, there is no good reason," Poole agreed. "But I must tell you more. All this week, the person or thing in that room has cried day and night for some sort of medicine, and he can't get what he wants. In the past, Dr. Jekyll sometimes wrote his orders on a piece of paper and threw it on the stairs. For a week, we've had only orders and a closed door. Orders for meals, but usually orders for a chemical. I took these orders to every chemist in London, and every time I brought the chemical back, there was another paper. It told me to take the chemical back. It wasn't right. It told me to try another chemist. I don't know what the chemical is for, Mr. Utterson, but I know that the person in that room wants it very badly." "Do you have any of those papers, Poole?" asked Mr. Utterson. "Yes, sir," said Poole. He put a hand in his pocket and took out a note. Then he gave it to Utterson. The man at Moore and Company was very angry, and he threw this one back at me. I kept it. Utterson read the note. Moore and Company. "You have sent me a chemical which is useless to me. In the year of 1875, I bought a large amount of this chemical from you. Now I must ask you to make a very careful search. If you have any of this old, good chemical, please send it to me immediately. The cost doesn't matter. This is very important." Then came the last sentence. The writer ended, "God help me. Please find me some of the old chemical. MR.HYDE." "It does seem to be Dr. Jekyll's writing," said Mr. Utterson. "Yes," said Poole, "but it isn't Dr. Jekyll up there. I know, because I've seen him." "You've seen him?" said the lawyer. "Yes, sir," said Poole. "When?" "I came suddenly into the workroom from the garden, and he was there in front of me," said Poole. "He probably came down secretly into the workroom to look for this chemical. His face was covered, and he was searching in the boxes in the workroom like a madman." "Did he see you?" asked the lawyer. "Yes, sir," replied Poole. "What happened?" asked Utterson. "When he saw me, he gave a cry. Then he ran up the stairs to the room above," said Poole. "This person's face was covered, but it wasn't the doctor." "His face was covered, you say?" said Utterson. "Perhaps he's hurt?" "Perhaps he covers it because he doesn't want to shock his friends." "No, sir," said Poole. "Dr. Jekyll is a tall, strong man. This man was small, and when I saw him, I felt sick." Mr. Utterson looked at the frightened servant. "We must speak honestly, Poole," he said. "This person with the covered face, do you know who it was?" "You mean, was it Mr. Hyde?" "Yes, sir, I think it was," said Poole. "He gave you the feeling that he was all evil." "I know that feeling," said the lawyer. "Now, listen, Poole. I will have to break down the door of the room above the workroom." "Oh, sir," Poole cried, "I'm very glad to hear you say that. I'll come with you. We'll do it together. There is an axe and a piece of metal in the workroom." "This will be dangerous," said Utterson. "I know that, sir," said Poole. They sent 2 men-servants to watch the door into the narrow street. "Poole and I are going to break into the room above the workroom," Utterson told them. "You must guard the door and stop anybody escaping. Take some big sticks to protect yourselves." Then Mr. Utterson and Poole went to the door of the room. They listened. Somebody was walking up and down inside. "Jekyll!" cried Utterson loudly. "I must see you." The walking stopped, but there was no answer. "If you don't open the door," called the lawyer, "we'll break it down. I must see you." "Utterson," they heard from the other side of the door, "have pity on me." "That's not Jekyll's voice," said Utterson. "It's Hyde's. The door must come down." It was a very well-made door and very strong. They had to use the axe many times before they could break the lock. They opened the door. The 2 men looked into the room. It looked like other rooms. but they were cupboards full of chemicals and tables for scientific work. There was a good warm fire burning in the fireplace. A desk drawer was open and some papers were lying on the top. But on the floor, right in the middle of the room, was the body of a man. The two men hurried across to it and turned it over onto its back. The face was Edward Hyde's. He was dressed in clothes that were too big for him, but the clothes were the right size for Dr. Jekyll. There was a broken glass in his hand, and a strong smell came from it. He was dead. "I'm afraid that we have arrived too late," Mr. Utterson said. "Hyde has killed himself. Now we can only look for the body of Dr. Jekyll." They searched the house, but they could not find the body. The door into the narrow street was locked, and the broken key was on the floor inside the door. "I don't understand this, Paul," said Mr. Utterson. "Let's go back upstairs." They went back to the room and to the body of Mr. Hyde. On one table there were small piles of some sort of white chemical on glass plates. "That's the chemical which he sent me out for," Paul said. "For an experiment?" said Utterson. There was a large envelope on the desk. The name Mr. Utterson was written on it in Dr. Jekyll's handwriting. The lawyer opened it. 3 things fell out. The first thing was a new will. Like Dr. Jekyll's first will, it spoke of his death or disappearance. But it was not Edward Hyde who now received everything. The lawyer was very surprised to read the name John Utterson. Utterson looked at Paul, then back at the papers, then at the body on the floor. "I don't understand this," he said. "Hyde has been here all this time. He saw this new will, and he had no reason to like me. My name is on the paper in place of his. I feel sure that he was very angry about that. But he hasn't destroyed the will. It is very strange." He picked up the next paper. It was a short note in the doctor's handwriting, and the date was at the top. "Paul!" he cried. "What is it?" said Paul. Mr. Utterson was excited. "Dr. Jekyll was here and alive today," he said. "He is still alive because no murderer could hide a body so quickly. Surely he has escaped. But why? How? And where did he go? There are a lot of questions here without answers. If we tell people about this death, perhaps we will make trouble for the doctor. Oh, we must be very careful, Paul." "Why don't you read the note, sir?" asked Paul. "Because I'm afraid," replied the lawyer. "I hope that I have no reason to be afraid, but—" "Please read it, sir," said Paul. So Utterson looked at the note. "My dear Utterson, when this is in your hands, my disappearance will be a fact. I don't know how it will happen. I do know that it will happen soon. So please go. Read the paper that Lanyon gave you, and then, if you want to know more, read my story. Your unhappy friend, Henry Jekyll." "Where is the third thing?" asked Utterson. "Here, sir." Paul picked up a thick envelope from the floor and gave it to the lawyer. Utterson put it in his pocket. "Let's say nothing about this yet," he said. "All right, sir," said Paul. "If the doctor has escaped, we can perhaps save his good name," said Mr. Utterson. "It is 10 o'clock now. I must go home and read these papers in a quiet place, but I will be back before midnight, and then we will send for the police." They went out, locking the door of the workroom behind them. "Goodbye, Poole," said Mr. Utterson. "Goodbye, sir," said Poole, "and thank you." Utterson walked home. There he read the 2 papers which explained the mystery. Chapter 11. Dr. Lanyon's Story. On the 9th of January, 4 days ago, I, Dr. Hasty Lanyon, received a letter in the evening post. My name and address on the envelope were in the handwriting of my old school friend, Dr. Henry Jekyll. I was surprised by this, because we did not often write. We met often for dinner, and I could not think of anything important enough for a letter. This was the letter. December the 9th, 1881. Dear Lanyon, you are one of my oldest friends. If one day you ever say to me, "Jekyll, my life, my good name, my mind are in danger," I will do everything to help you. Now, Lanyon, my life, my good name, and my mind are all in great danger. If you don't help me tonight, I'm finished. I ask you to do this after you have read this letter. Drive straight to my house. Poole, my servant, is waiting for you. He will take you to the door of the room above my workroom. I want you to go in alone. Open the cupboard with the letter E on the left. Break the lock if necessary. Pull out the 4th drawer from the top. Inside it there are some chemicals, a bottle and a notebook. Please take the drawer to your house. At midnight, please be alone in your office. A man will come. Give him the drawer. That is all that I ask you to do. 5 minutes after that, you will understand how important this is to me. I do not believe that you will fail me. I am sure that you will do this. With all my thanks, H.J. I was sure that the doctor was mad, but until that was proved, I had to complete his request. I got a taxi and went immediately to Jekyll's house. The servant was waiting there for me. He, too, had a letter with his orders from Dr. Jekyll. The cupboard with the letter E on it was not locked. I took out the drawer, covered it with a cloth, and brought it back to my house. When I was home again, I looked at the things in the drawer. They were what Jekyll described, but it soon became clear that the chemicals were prepared by Jekyll and not by a chemist. I opened one of the packets and found something white. It looked like salt, but it wasn't. I next looked at a small bottle of blood-red liquid. I opened it, and it smelled very strongly. I could not name the smell, but it was very unpleasant. There was very little in the notebook except dates. There was sometimes a word or two after the date. Double is an example, and once early in the list completely failed. I could only guess their meanings. How did these things help me to do anything for the life, the good name, or the mind of the doctor? It looked like the work of a madman. And why couldn't Jekyll's messenger go to Jekyll's house and get these things, I thought. Why did I have to go for him? I sent my servants to bed, and at midnight I was waiting alone in my office with a drawer and a gun. There was a quiet knock at the door. I opened it. I found a small man trying to stay in the dark shadows. "Are you from Dr. Jekyll?" I asked. He made a noise that I understood as yes. I told him to come in. He saw a policeman come into the square of the far side, and he fearfully hurried inside. This worried me a little, and I kept my hand on the gun in my pocket. I took him into the bright light of the office, and there I studied my visitor. He was a stranger to me. He was small, as I have said, and ugly, and I noticed that I had a very strong feeling of dislike and sickness. His clothes were expensive and very well made, but they were too big for him. Unusually, they did not amuse me. He was worried and excited at the same time. "Have you got it?" he cried. "Have you got it?" He put his hand on my arm to shake it. I pushed it off. "You forget, sir," I said, "that we have not met in the usual way. Please sit down." "I'm very sorry, Dr. Lanyon," he said. He sat down. "You are quite right. Your friend, Dr. Henry Jekyll, sent me here on an important piece of business, and I understand that a drawer—" I pointed to the drawer. "There it is, sir," I said. He jumped out of his seat and almost ran to it. Then he stopped suddenly and put his hand over his heart. His face was white, and I was afraid for his life and his mind. "You must be calm," I said. He gave me a terrible smile, picked up the drawer and looked at the things in it. He saw that they were all there. Then he said to me, "Do you have a glass?" I gave him what he wanted. He put some of the liquid from the bottle into the glass. Then he put in some of the chemical and mixed the two together. The liquid seemed to get brighter and began to smell even more strongly than before. My visitor watched it closely. Then he put the glass down on the table. He looked at me carefully. "Now, will you be sensible?" he said. "Can I take this glass away without any questions, or must you have answers? Think carefully before you reply. I can leave now, or you can watch something terribly shocking." "I want to see the end of this," I said. "Lanyon," he said, "do you remember your promise when you became a doctor of medicine? This is a secret. Remember your promise and keep it a secret." He put the glass to his mouth and drank the liquid, all of it. I watched him. With a cry, he reached for the table and nearly fell down. His eyes opened wide, and strange noises came from his mouth. Then he began to change. He seemed to get bigger. His face suddenly went black, and parts of it moved like liquid. I was frightened, and I jumped back against the wall away from him. I put a hand to my mouth. "Oh, God!" I heard myself crying again and again. There, in front of my eyes, pale and shaking, like a man back from death, there was Henry Jekyll. I just cannot write down the things that he told me in the next hour. I saw what I saw. I heard what I heard. Now I ask myself, do I believe it? And I cannot answer that question. I cannot sleep. A terrible fear is with me every hour of every day and night. I cannot think about the evil man and the terrible things that he told me without fear. I know that I shall soon die, but I will die without understanding. I can only tell you one thing, Utterson. The evil person in my house that night was a man called Hyde, the murderer of Sir Danvers Carew, the man that every policeman in the country is looking for. Hasty Lanyon. Chapter 12. Henry Jekyll's story. I, Dr. Henry Jekyll, was born in the year of 1830. My family was rich. I studied to be a doctor. I liked the hard work. Other people soon had a good opinion of me, and I liked that too. I seemed to have a good future in front of me. Everything looked bright and good. My worst problem was my love of fun. I enjoyed the wild nightlife too much. Many people have found that a love of fun helps them to enjoy life. I wanted to seem serious, and this didn't help. So I was careful to hide this side of my life. In this way, my life became a lie. Even before I finished my studies, I already had a double life. My actions were not serious, but I did not want them to be a part of my working life. The years passed, and I grew older and more sensible, but it was too late to change my double life. And then, through my scientific studies, I learned something important. I learned that man has two sides, a good side and an evil side. I knew that this was true of me. I was honest about it. As a doctor, I tried to learn more and to help sick and suffering people. The other part of me was also honest about its search. Slowly, it became clear to me that man is not just one person. He is two people. Can I separate the two sides? I asked myself. Can I make two people, one good, one bad, from a single person? If I can, life will be much easier. The bad person can live in his own bad way without hurting the good person and people's opinion of him. And the good person's good name will be in no danger because of the other person's bad actions. It seems wrong that we have to live with both persons in the same body. At that time, I was doing some scientific work. I found that some chemicals have a great power. They can change a person's body. They can change its shape and make it bigger or smaller. I do not want to be too clear about the scientific part of this story. My reason? Because, as my story will show, my experiments were not completed. It was a long time before I decided to try the chemicals. There were too many things that could go wrong. I was afraid of dying. But finally, I had to know. I had to have the answer. My experiments showed me the liquid that was necessary. Then I bought from Moe & Company, the chemists, a lot of the special salt chemical that I needed to put into it. Late one night, I carefully put the salt chemical and liquid into a glass and mixed them together. I watched the liquid change color. Then, nervously, I drank what was in the glass. I felt terrible pain and a great sickness. But then, quite quickly, the pain went away and I began to feel better. I felt younger, lighter, happier, and free in my body. My mind felt free too, but I knew immediately that I was more evil than every other man on earth. How did I know this? I don't know. But it was a wonderful feeling, like the taste of the best wine. I looked down at my body. I saw immediately that I was smaller than before. There was no mirror in my workroom then. I brought it in later. So that night I went quickly across the dark courtyard and into the house. It was after midnight. All my servants were asleep, so they did not see me. I went quietly up to my bedroom and straight to my mirror. In it, for the first time, I saw the man that I decided to call Edward Hyde. He was much smaller and younger than Henry Jekyll. I can only believe that the evil side of me was not fully grown. It was not as strong as my good side. The worst part of me was not as old and tired as the good and honest part. The ugly face in the mirror was an evil face, I knew that, but I felt no fear. I welcomed it, because it seemed very natural. The face looked more alive than my usual face. Later, I realized that people could not come near me without a feeling of great dislike. They hated me before I even spoke. This is probably because they have never met a man like Edward Hyde. He is a man who is all bad, all evil, I told myself. Most people are good and bad. Now came the next part of my experiment. I returned to my workroom and prepared the chemical again, and drank it. Once again I suffered the terrible pains of change, but I soon had the face and body of Henry Jekyll. That night my life changed forever. The experiment was a success, and from that time I was two people. One was Edward Hyde, a man completely evil. The other man was dear old Henry Jekyll. As time passed, I felt a greater and greater need to escape into the younger, more exciting body of Edward Hyde. And it was so easy. I only had to drink the liquid, and there I was, in my new life. I prepared everything carefully. As Hyde, I took the house in Soho and employed a woman. She looked after it and asked no questions. As Jekyll, I described Mr. Hyde and told my servants, "Mr. Hyde can use my house in the square when he wants to use it." I visited the house 2 or 3 times as Mr. Hyde, so there were no mistakes. His visits became quite usual. At times, Henry Jekyll was shocked and frightened by the things that Edward Hyde did, but only Hyde did wrong. Jekyll was not worse than before the experiment. He often tried to correct the wrong things that were done by Hyde. Then I made the will that you did not like. Why did I make it? Because I wanted to be able to change from Dr. Jekyll to Edward Hyde without losing all my money. I would not like to describe everything that I did as Edward Hyde, but I will tell you about one accident. It happened one night. I knocked down a child, and this made another man very angry. I saw the man the other day. He is your friend. The child's family were very angry too. For a time I was afraid that they wanted to kill me, but Edward Hyde calmed them. He brought them to the workroom door and gave them a check from Henry Jekyll. But most of the time everything seemed perfect. If I was in trouble as Hyde, I only had to escape into my workroom through the door in the narrow street. I only needed a minute to make and drink the liquid. Then Edward Hyde disappeared. In his place, sitting quietly at his desk, was good, honest Henry Jekyll. Edward Hyde was an evil man. Slowly, his actions got worse and worse. Then, 2 months before the murder of Sir Danvers Carew, I, Henry Jekyll, went out one evening and returned late. When I woke up the next morning, I looked down at my hand. The skin on it was darker, and it was half covered in thick hair. It was the hand of Edward Hyde. I looked at it for almost a minute before I jumped out of bed. I ran to the mirror and looked at my face. Yes, there it was. There was no mistake. I went to bed as Henry Jekyll, but I have woken up as Edward Hyde. I thought, how could it happen? What went wrong? And what am I going to do? All my chemicals were in my workroom, but I had to get to them. It was late in the morning and my servants were already working in the house. But I had to go through the house and across the courtyard. Then I remembered. Of course, I thought. The servants have seen Edward Hyde in the house before now. And I laughed. I dressed quickly and went downstairs. One of my servants saw me. He looked a little shocked when he saw Edward Hyde so early in the day, but he said nothing. I hurried across the courtyard as fast as I could. I went straight to my workroom and quickly mixed the liquid. Then I drank it. 10 minutes later, Dr. Jekyll returned to the house for his breakfast. Chapter 13. The End of the Story. After this, I began to think more seriously about my two different lives. When I was Henry Jekyll, I knew very well about Mr. Hyde's activities, and I began to see a new danger. Hyde is becoming too evil, too strong, I thought. Perhaps a time will come soon when I will not be able to change back to Dr. Henry Jekyll. Hyde will have too much power. I shall be with him for the rest of my life. I knew that it was a real danger. Sometimes I had to make the liquid 2 or 3 times stronger than usual before I could change back from Hyde to Dr. Jekyll. I had to choose between these two, Jekyll or Hyde. Jekyll did not have the excitement, the most pleasant dangers of Hyde's life. But Hyde did not work as a doctor. He was hated and he had no friends. I decided not to bring Hyde back again. I preferred the old and perhaps boring doctor with his friends, I decided. So I said goodbye to Hyde. I missed feeling younger. I missed the excitement of Hyde's life. But for 2 months, I did not bring him back. Then, in an hour of weakness, I went to my workroom and made the terrible liquid, and brought him back again. I was frightened by what happened next. Hyde was a prisoner for 2 months, so now he was like a wild animal. I could feel the new power of his evil ways. He wanted to shout and scream and hurt somebody. Then I met the unlucky Sir Danvers Carew in the street. He asked me a simple question, and I enjoyed hitting him again and again. I only stopped when I was tired. I looked down at the broken body of the old man, and suddenly I felt fear. Hyde was in danger. Hyde had to get away. I ran through the dark shadows of the streets to my house in Soho. I was shaking with fear and excitement. When I got to the house, I destroyed all my papers. Then I went out into the streets again and hurried to my workroom. There I felt safe. I sang a song as I mixed the chemical and the liquid. I drank it and thought of the dead man, and laughed and laughed. After the terrible pain of change ended, I, as Henry Jekyll, fell down onto my knees because I was that good man again. I covered my face. I wanted to scream loudly when I thought of the terrible murder of that poor old man. Tears poured from my eyes. I asked God to forgive me. Next day, the newspapers were full of the story of the murder of Sir DR.JEKYLL. I read all of them. I learned for the first time that someone watched the murder from a window. And now the police had the name of the murderer, Edward Hyde. The Carew murder made my future clear. It was impossible to bring Hyde back, because the world was looking for him. The world was waiting to take the life of a murderer. I will never bring him back again, I told myself. I locked the door from the workroom to the street and broke the key. I have finished with evil, I promised myself. I will work harder. I will help weak, ill, and suffering people. You know that I tried to do this during the last months of last year. I never dreamed of bringing the terrible Edward Hyde back again. On a fine, clear January day, when there was not one cloud in the sky, I was sitting in the sun in Regent's Park. I was resting after a hard morning's work. The birds were singing, and my mind was not busy. Perhaps I was sleepily remembering happier days when I was young. Suddenly, I had feelings of pain, sickness, and shock. When the pain left me, I looked down. My clothes were hanging over the smaller body and legs of Edward Hyde. I could not believe it. A minute before I was safe, rich, and loved. The good, honest Dr. Jekyll. Now, suddenly, I was the man that everybody was looking for, a man without a home, a murderer. I had to change back again, and quickly, before somebody saw me. But how could I get the chemicals that I needed? They were in my workroom, and the street door to the workroom was locked. I could not go into the house from the square. Everyone was looking for Mr. Hyde. My servants, too. What can I do? I thought. Hyde's mind was quicker than Jekyll's. He thought of Lanyon. How can I reach him? I thought. And how can I, Hyde, ask him to steal things from his friend, Dr. Jekyll? Then I remembered something, and I laughed. I can still write a letter in my handwriting, I thought. And I knew immediately what I had to do. I walked out of the park and stopped a passing taxi, then drove to Portland Street. The driver looked at the clothes that did not fit me. He was clearly amused, but he said nothing. In Portland Street, I went to a cheap hotel and asked for a private room. The man at the hotel desk looked at my clothes and smiled. But the look on my face quickly took the smile from his mouth. I asked for some paper, and he gave it to me. Then I went to the room. There I sat at the table and wrote 2 letters, one to Lanyon and one to Poole. Then I paid a servant at the hotel, and he took them. The rest of the day was a time of great fear. Most of the time I sat alone in the hotel room. A waiter brought my dinner to me. Then I sat by the fire. When it was dark, I left the hotel. I walked through the empty streets of the city until midnight. I walked quickly and stayed in the shadows. Once a woman spoke to me, but I hit her across the face and she ran away. I changed back to myself, to Dr. Jekyll, at Lanyon's house. He was shocked, and the fear on my old friend's face hurt me. He was angry with me, of course, but the memory of those terrible hours as Hyde frightened me most. I was terribly afraid. Not afraid of a murderer's death, but afraid of being Hyde. I listened to Lanyon's angry words, but I seemed to be in a dream. And I seemed to walk home and go to my bed in that same dream. I slept well at home. In the morning I felt weak but calm. I hated the evil man who slept inside me, but I was at home in my own house again, near the chemicals that I needed. After breakfast, I walked across the courtyard to my workroom. I was enjoying the cold but clear air. Then suddenly I began to change into Hyde again. I realized immediately what was happening. I had enough time to reach my room over the workroom. Then I was filled with the power of Hyde's evil. I worked quickly, but I had to take double the usual amount of the liquid before I was Jekyll again. 6 hours after that, the pain and the change returned, and again I had to take the liquid. From that day, only the chemical kept Hyde away. At all hours of the day and night I felt pain and suffered the change. When I slept, I woke up as Hyde. Even if I fell half asleep for a minute in my chair, the same thing happened. I was afraid to sleep. But when I stayed awake, the change still came. When the power of the chemical became weak, I became Hyde. Without sleep and with a terrible fear, my health began to leave me. And as Jekyll got weaker, Hyde grew stronger. Now a last terrible thing has happened. I sent Poole for more chemicals when the chemicals from Moore and Company were nearly finished. I mixed them with the liquid, but they were not strong enough. The color of the liquid was different. I drank it, but nothing happened. Poole will tell you that he searched London for more chemicals. I believe now that there was something in those first chemicals. It was not there in the other chemicals. That unknown something gave the chemical its power. About a week has passed. I am using the last of the old chemicals, so I can write this to you. This is the last time that Henry Jekyll will have his own mind. He will not see his face, now terribly changed and old, in the mirror again. And I must bring my story to an end quickly. If the change comes now, Hyde will destroy this letter. But if I have already finished it, he will be too busy. He has to think of a way to escape the death of a murderer. Will Hyde hang as a murderer? Or will he be brave? Will he kill himself and escape that death? I don't know. This is my real hour of death. The future will happen to another person. Here, then, I'm putting my pen down, and I'm ending the life of the unhappy Henry Jekyll.